In the inaugural year of the 12-team college football playoff, that's allowed schools like Arizona State, Boise State, Indiana, and SMU to enter the national championship conversation. One of the best storylines to come out of this postseason has been the dominance of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Now, let's be clear, Notre Dame is far from a newcomer to the college football scene. Since their first season in 1887, they've staked their claim as one of the most accomplished schools in college football history. 11 national championships, 7 Heisman Trophy winners, 15 undefeated seasons, 10 of which were perfect records. To put it simply, Notre Dame is a college football powerhouse, but it's been a while since they've been in the national championship game. This season hasn't been all sunshine and rainbows either. After a Week 2 loss to Northern Illinois, many people wrote off the Fighting Irish completely. But after winning 13 straight games to earn their spot in this year's national championship, they've silenced all the critics. But let's not kid ourselves. People aren't talking about Notre Dame because there's some Cinderella story. People are talking about Notre Dame because of a single word: independent. In a new era of college football dominated by money, Notre Dame's independent status has given the school a unique financial advantage. The thought process is simple. By reaching this year's national championship game, Notre Dame has earned $20 million in performance bonuses, $4 million for making the college football playoff bracket, $4 million for making the quarterfinals, $6 million for reaching the semifinals, and another $6 million for making the championship game. Thanks to their status as an independent, Notre Dame gets to keep every single dime of that money for themselves, as opposed to sharing it with other schools in their conference. Take Ohio State, for example. The Buckeyes have won just as many games as Notre Dame in this year's college football playoff, but since they have to share performance bonuses with every other school in their conference, the current national championship favorite will only receive $2.5 million. Or 12.5% of what Notre Dame is getting. When you factor in Notre Dame's ability to pick its own schedule and not having to play in a conference championship game, you can see why people don't think this setup is entirely fair. It isn't just keyboard warriors in their parents' basement making these claims either. Credible and educated journalists have been hitting this topic for weeks. Penn State head coach James Franklin even said it to Marcus Freeman's face, telling reporters last week at the Orange Bowl that every school should be in a conference.
I think it should be consistent across college football. I think, again, this is no knock at Coach or Notre Dame, but I think everybody should be in a conference. I think everybody should play a conference championship game, or no one should play a conference championship game.
I can understand why some people feel this way. The richest college football programs are theoretically able to pay their players the most money. So if they could also soften their schedule by loading it up with less than stellar teams, the chance of consistently making an expanded 12-team college football playoff would obviously increase. But just because someone makes a sound argument doesn't mean that it's true. The numbers, however, tell a different story, one that is far more interesting than the current narrative. So let's dig in. First off, to understand why Notre Dame is one of only a few independent college football programs around today, you have to know a little bit of history. And that history shows Notre Dame hasn't always been content being on their own. In fact, they've tried to join a conference several times over the past 125 years. In 1899, the Big Nine Conference passed over Notre Dame to admit Iowa and Indiana. In 1926, Notre Dame tried to join what would eventually become the Big Ten. But thanks to University of Michigan's athletic director Fielding Yost blocking the move, Notre Dame remained independent, preventing them from playing against other schools in the Midwest. However, thanks to Fielding Yost's unrelenting dislike for Notre Dame, their status as an independent led them to start scheduling games against West Coast opponents like USC and Stanford, helping them become the national program they are today. While major programs being independent might seem strange nowadays, Notre Dame was hardly a unicorn for the majority of college football's history. Schools like Penn State, Miami, Pitt, Florida State, Syracuse, and West Virginia were all independent football programs up until the 1990s. In fact, in 1988, the year Notre Dame won its last national championship, the top 10 was chock full of independent programs. Notre Dame, Miami, Florida State, and West Virginia were all ranked inside the top 5, and 6 of the 10 national champions in the 1980s were independent programs. Then, like TVs and computers, everything changed in the 90s. Miami, Syracuse, Pitt, Virginia Tech, West Virginia, Rutgers, and Boston College all partnered up to create the Big East Conference in 1991. Florida State then left for the ACC in 1992, and Penn State ditched the independent label as well, joining the Big Ten in 1993. The reason behind the independent exodus was the same as it's always been: money. The idea was that these schools could sign larger media rights deals by packaging their rights together. But this left Notre Dame in a weird spot, grouping them together with a small collection of independent schools like Louisville, Memphis, Tulsa, Tulane, Southern Miss, East Carolina, Cincinnati, Army, and Navy. Notre Dame was still a member of the College Football Association, created in the 1970s to increase the value of college football TV deals. But with the CFA failing to secure viable TV deals by 1990, and most other big-name schools leaving to join a conference, Notre Dame took matters into their own hands, signing a TV deal with NBC in 1991. The Fighting Irish have been a mainstay on NBC ever since, recently signing a new TV deal worth $50 million a year. Having said that, Notre Dame isn't entirely independent. Other than men's ice hockey, which plays in the Big Ten, they play all of their other sports in the ACC. The deal with the ACC pays Notre Dame $17 million a year. Add that in with the NBC money, and Notre Dame takes home $67 million annually in TV money. Given that there are so many conferences and the college football playoff itself have recently signed new TV rights deals, all of which kick in at different times over the next few years, it's sort of hard to compare media revenue between schools. But if we want to look a few years out into the future, when the dust eventually settles, the money becomes a little bit easier to compare. For example, when the college football playoff's new media rights deal with ESPN kicks in 2026-27, the Big Ten is expected to distribute $70 to $80 million to each of its schools annually. The SEC will be at or around the same number thanks to its new 10-year, $3 billion TV deal with ESPN. And guess what? Notre Dame will be right up there with the big dogs, expecting to generate $79 million in TV money from deals with NBC, the ACC, and college football playoff's new ESPN deal. So while it's true that Notre Dame will get to keep all $20 million from its national championship run this season, it's important to remember that conference-affiliated schools get larger guaranteed payments each year from the CFP. Let's fast forward to the 2026-27 season. Each SEC and Big Ten school is expected to receive $21 million annually from the college football playoff deal with ESPN, regardless of whether they make the 12-team bracket or not. ACC schools will get $13 million each, and Big 12 schools will take home $12 million. Notre Dame, on the other hand, is only guaranteed $12 million. They can increase that number to $18 million, but only if they make the 12-team playoff, thanks to a special rule that awards independent teams with a $6 million bonus for making the playoff. Why is that so important? Well, it's because Notre Dame only receives the $6 million bonus for making the playoff, as opposed to other schools that get paid simply for being in a conference. This means Notre Dame is guaranteed to make less money than non-playoff teams in the SEC and Big Ten, even if they go on to win the national championship that year. Now, I get it. What's $6 million to a school like Notre Dame? Sure, money is everything, even more so in the age of NIL, but that line of thinking isn't necessarily true, or at least it won't be in the future. Think about it this way. Everyone says Ohio State spent $20 million on its roster this year, but when you look at the numbers, most of that money was spent on retaining players they'd already recruited to the school, not to mention the fact that several other programs spent just as much as the Buckeyes, if not more. When it comes to Notre Dame, they have the second largest football budget of any team in this year's playoff, and thanks to the House vs. NCAA settlement expected to kick in next year, there will be a $20 to $25 million revenue sharing limit on all schools, regardless of how much cash they have on hand. Every school expected to compete for a national championship will be able to meet that limit easily. There's always a legitimate NIL component at play, but even if Notre Dame has an unlimited pile of cash to spend on its roster, the new rules will set a hard cap on school-based player compensation. So what about ticket sales, merchandise, or sponsorships? Well, that's all pretty much the same between all the big schools. It's not like Notre Dame got to keep any ticket revenue from hosting their college football playoff game this year, as all of that revenue goes straight to the college football playoff committee. As for James Franklin and all the other schedule haters out there, being able to pick your opponents isn't even that big of an advantage. Yes, you can try to soften your schedule ahead of time, but it's still not a guarantee who will be good and who won't. In this season alone, for instance, Notre Dame has been the number 2, number 6, number 10, number 15, number 18, number 20, and number 24 teams in the country. Meanwhile, Texas, a proud member of the SEC, paid $5 million in tune-up fees by scheduling non-conference home games against less than stellar programs like Colorado State, UT San Antonio, and Louisiana Monroe. Not exactly a gauntlet of opponents. Let me be very clear though, I am not a Notre Dame fan. I just find this whole discussion wildly overblown. Does Notre Dame's independent status provide some benefits? Absolutely, but it also provides plenty of disadvantages. More importantly though, if other schools really and truly thought it was that big of an advantage to be independent, they'd have made that decision years ago. The fact that none of them are making that transition should tell you everything you need to know. So whether or not you're rooting for the Irish or the Buckeyes, let's all just agree that Notre Dame proved their right to be playing for this year's national championship.